Don't skip any part of this story. Bond till the end, because this tale isn't just about a puppy. It's about love, loss, loyalty, and an unwavering spirit that reminds us what it means to truly care. It began in the chill of an early winter morning. The town was quiet, blanketed by a grey sky that seemed to press down on everything below. Life moved slowly here, as if the people and the place were caught in time. Yet, amidst the silence, a small, trembling figure could be seen. A puppy. Alone. Its fur was dirty, its ribs visible beneath its fragile body. But it wasn't wandering like a stray. No, this puppy had chosen its place, a grave at the far end of the cemetery. The grave wasn't special. It bore no grand monument, no expensive flowers, just a simple stone marker with a name and a date. And yet, to the puppy, it seemed sacred. Every day it lay there, rain or shine. It curled up on the cold ground as if it belonged, as if it was waiting. At first, no one noticed. Cemeteries aren't places people linger. But one day, an old groundskeeper named Henry saw it. He thought it was just another stray at first, but something about its eyes stopped him. They were so filled with sadness, like it was mourning, like it had lost something. Henry tried to shoo it away, but the puppy wouldn't leave. Instead, it whimpered softly, its tiny frame shaking against the biting wind. Henry's heart ached. He brought food the next day, leaving it a few feet from the grave. The puppy hesitated but eventually ate. And so, a strange routine began. Henry would bring scraps, and the puppy would accept them, but only from a distance. It never wagged its tail, never barked, just ate in silence and returned to the grave. News of the puppy spread. People came to see it, some leaving treats, others trying to coax it away. But the puppy stayed. Its loyalty was unyielding. Whispers filled the town. Whose grave was it? Why was the puppy so attached? No one had answers. The name on the stone was unfamiliar, and the date marked a death just a few weeks ago. A local journalist, curious about the mystery, decided to dig deeper. Her name was Sarah. She had grown tired of the same old stories in the small town, a lost cat, a new shop, the occasional scandal. But this was different. There was something haunting about the way the puppy clung to the grave. It was more than instinct. It was almost human. Sarah visited the cemetery, watching the puppy from a distance. It didn't look up, didn't move, just stared at the grave as if it held the world. She took photos, wrote notes, and then began her research. The name on the grave belonged to a man named Daniel Hart. He had no family, no close friends. His life had been quiet, almost invisible, and his death had gone unnoticed by most. But Sarah found one connection: a shelter. Daniel had been a volunteer there for years. He had loved animals, especially dogs. He would often bring strays home, caring for them until they found a family. But in the weeks before his death, something had changed. He stopped showing up. No one knew why. Sarah visited the shelter, asking questions. One of the workers, a middle-aged woman named Martha, remembered something. A puppy. Tiny, weak, abandoned at their doorstep. Daniel had taken it in, nursing it back to health. He named it Hope, Martha said softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It was the only time I saw him truly happy. But then, he stopped coming. We thought he'd found a home for Hope. The truth hit Sarah like a storm. The puppy at the grave, could it be Hope? But how? How had it found its way to the cemetery? How did it know? These questions burned in her mind, but the answers felt elusive. Back at the cemetery, Sarah watched as a small crowd gathered around the puppy. Some brought blankets, others tried to carry it away, but it resisted. It would snap, growl, even bite if anyone got too close to the grave. It was clear this wasn't just a place. It was a promise. Henry, the old groundskeeper, stood nearby, shaking his head. "That pup," he said to Sarah, "it's got a heart bigger than most people I know. It's grieving. Don't need words to see that." Grieving. The word echoed in Sarah's mind. Could animals feel lost the way humans do? Could they hold on to love, even in death? The idea was both beautiful and heartbreaking. These turned into weeks. The puppy's story spread beyond the town. People from other cities came to see it. Videos went viral. Experts weighed in. Some called it instinct, others a bond beyond comprehension. but no one could deny the raw emotion in the puppy's eyes. It wasn't just surviving, it was remembering. One cold evening, Sarah sat by the grave, her notebook in hand. The puppy lay curled up, its breathing shallow. "Why won't you leave?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you waiting for?" As if in response, the puppy lifted its head, staring at her with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken words. In that moment, Sarah felt something shift. It wasn't just about the puppy or Daniel. It was about love, pure, unconditional, unbreakable. And then, one morning, everything changed. The puppy was gone. People searched the cemetery, the surrounding streets, even the shelter, but there was no sign of it. The grave, once its sanctuary, was empty. Months passed. The story faded. Life went on. But Sarah couldn't forget. She often visited the grave, leaving flowers, her heart heavy with unanswered questions. One day, as she walked through the cemetery, she saw something that stopped her in her tracks. A woman, young, with a gentle smile, kneeling by Daniel's grave. Beside her, a dog grown healthy, but unmistakably the same puppy. "Bully, Whoop." The woman looked up, her eyes meeting Sarah's. "He found me," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I lost everything, my family, my home. But this little one, he found me. It's like he knew I needed him." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. The puppy hadn't left. It had fulfilled its purpose. It had stayed until it could pass its love to someone else. Someone who needed hope as much as it did. The grave, once a place of mourning, became a symbol of life, of second chances, of the bonds that transcend death. And as Sarah walked away, she realized the story wasn't about loss. It was about love that refuses to let go, love that finds a way. So, if you've ever doubted the power of love, remember hope. Remember the puppy that refused to leave. And remember that sometimes the smallest hearts carry the biggest truths. Hope's story didn't end there. The bond between the woman and the dog became something of legend in the little town. Sarah couldn't help but feel drawn to their journey, like an unfinished chapter that demanded to be written. She reached out to the woman, curious about how hope had changed her life. Her name was Clara, a quiet soul who had recently moved to the area. Life hadn't been kind to her. She had lost her parents in a car accident a year ago, and the weight of grief had slowly chipped away at her spirit. She wandered aimlessly, unsure of where she belonged, carrying nothing but a small bag and a heart heavy with sorrow. Clara had been sleeping in an abandoned shed on the edge of town when Hope found her. One cold night, she heard soft whimpering outside the door. She opened it to find the dog, shivering and weak. Its ribs still showed, and its fur was matted with dirt, but its eyes held something that struck her to her core. Clara knelt, hesitating at first, but when Hope rested its small head against her knee, something broke inside her. It wasn't just pity, it was recognition. They were the same. Two lost souls searching for something, anything, to hold on to. She fed the dog the little food she had left, a crust of bread and a slice of cheese. Hope stayed by her side, curling up next to her that night, its body trembling against the cold. Clara didn't know how, but for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. Over the weeks, the two became inseparable. Clara started walking into town to find work, Hope trotting faithfully by her side. People in the community recognized the dog immediately, and whispers followed her wherever she went. "That's the graveyard dog," they'd say. "The one who stayed by Daniel's grave." Some people offered to take Hope in, to give Clara money or food. But she always politely refused. She didn't want charity, she wanted to build her own life, for herself and for Hope. And build she did. Months later, Sarah found herself sitting with Clara at a small cafe in town. The transformation was remarkable. Clara looked healthier, her eyes brighter, her posture no longer weighed down by invisible burdens. Hope sat at her feet, wagging its tail gently whenever someone walked by. "It's like he saved me," Clara said, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "I thought I was rescuing him, but the truth is, he rescued me." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "Do you ever wonder why he stayed by Daniel's grave for so long?" she asked. Clara nodded, her gaze distant. "I think he was waiting. For me, maybe, or for someone who needed him as much as he needed them." She reached down, scratching Hope behind the ears. I think Daniel knew what he was doing when he named him Hope. He gave the world one last gift. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah couldn't help but think about the countless ways love and loss intertwine, how they shape us in ways we don't always understand. Hope's presence in Clara's life became a ripple effect. She found work at the same animal shelter where Daniel had once volunteered. At first she cleaned kennels and fed the animals, but over time her natural empathy and gentle spirit earned her a deeper role. She began helping with adoptions, pairing dogs with families who needed them as much as she had needed Hope. The shelter thrived under her care, and soon it became more than just a place for animals. It became a haven for people, a space where broken hearts could find healing through the unconditional love of a pet. The townspeople rallied around Clara and Hope. They organized fundraisers, donated supplies, and shared their own stories of how animals had changed their lives. The shelter grew, and with it, so did the community's spirit. But the most poignant moment came one sunny afternoon when Clara decided to visit Daniel's grave with Sarah. Hope walked ahead, tail wagging, as if it knew exactly where to go. When they reached the simple stone marker, Clara knelt, her fingers brushing the cool surface. She placed a bouquet of wildflowers at its base, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Sarah watched in silence, her throat tight with emotion. Hope lay down beside the grave, its body relaxed but its eyes alert, as if keeping watch. In that moment, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The story had come full circle. Daniel's quiet life, his love for animals, his bond with Hope, it had all led to this. A legacy of kindness, carried forward by those who understood its value. The tale of Hope and Clara spread far beyond the town. It inspired articles, videos, even a documentary. People from all over the world wrote letters to Clara, sharing their own stories of resilience and love. Some adopted animals, others volunteered at shelters, and many simply found comfort in knowing that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope. And Hope. He lived a long, happy life, always by Clara's side. Together they became a symbol of the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, a reminder that love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. As Sarah wrote the final words of her story, she couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just a story about a puppy anymore. It was a story about all of us, about loss and loyalty, about finding light in the darkest places, and about the simple, profound truth that love, in all its forms, is what makes life worth living. And that is a truth we should never forget. Clara and Hope's story didn't stop with healing their own hearts. It grew into something even more profound, something neither of them could have imagined. Months after Clara's visit to Daniel's grave, the shelter began to receive more attention. Donations poured in, not just money, but supplies, food, blankets, and even toys for the animals. People from nearby towns came to volunteer, drawn by the story of the graveyard puppy and the woman who turned her life around with its love. But it wasn't just the shelter that transformed. Clara herself became a symbol of hope in the community. She didn't set out to inspire others, she was just trying to live, to do her part. Yet her quiet determination and compassion touched lives in ways she couldn't see. One day, a woman approached Clara at the shelter. She looked nervous, clutching a small bag in her hands. In it was a tiny kitten, barely old enough to walk, its eyes clouded with infection. "I didn't know where else to go," the woman said, her voice trembling. "I heard about what you've done here, and I thought you might be able to help." Clara gently took the kitten, holding its fragile body close. "Of course," she said, her voice soft but steady. "We'll do everything we can." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means to me." Clara smiled, but she didn't respond. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes, the care in her touch, said everything. Hope had a way of knowing when someone needed comfort. At first, Clara thought it was coincidence, but over time she realized it was more. Whenever a new animal arrived, frightened or hurt, Hope was there. He would sit quietly nearby, his presence a calming force. It was as if he remembered his own pain and wanted to assure them they were safe now. One evening, as Clara cleaned the kennels, she found herself watching Hope. He was lying next to an older dog, a shepherd mix that had been surrendered after its owner passed away. The dog had refused to eat for days, its eyes dull and lifeless. But tonight, as Hope rested beside it, the shepherd began to wag its tail ever so slightly. Clara's chest tightened. She knelt, her hand resting on Hope's head. "You're special, you know that," she murmured. Hope looked up at her, his tail wagging gently. The shelter grew into something of a sanctuary, not just for animals but for people too. Families came to adopt, but many stayed to talk, to share their stories, to find solace in a place that radiated warmth and understanding. Clara began hosting events, storytelling nights, workshops on animal care, even group therapy sessions for people who had experienced loss. She didn't have formal training, but her own journey gave her the wisdom and empathy needed to guide others. One night, during a quiet moment at the shelter, Clara sat with Sarah. The journalist had become a close friend, someone Clara trusted implicitly. "You've built something incredible here," Sarah said, her voice filled with admiration. Clara shook her head. "I didn't do it alone. Hope started it. Daniel started it. I just followed where it led." Sarah smiled. "That's the beauty of it, though. You turned their love into something bigger, something lasting." Clara looked down at Hope, who was dozing at her feet. "I think about Daniel sometimes," she admitted. "I wish I could thank him. For saving Hope, for saving me." "You have," Sarah said. "Every single day, with everything you do." Years passed, and the shelter became a cornerstone of the community. Clara eventually started a program in Daniel's name, offering free veterinary care to low-income families. She called it the Heart of Hope Fund. The name brought tears to the eyes of those who knew Daniel, and it ensured his legacy lived on. Hope, now older and graying, remained Clara's faithful companion. Though his energy waned with age, his spirit never did. He continued to comfort new arrivals, to bring peace to those who needed it. One evening, as the sun set over the town, Clara sat on the shelter's porch with Hope by her side. The air was warm, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. "You've done so much," my boy, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "More than I could ever repay." Hope leaned against her, his eyes closing as if to say, "You've done enough." The day came, as it always does, when Hope's journey reached its end. Clara held him close in his final moments, her tears falling freely, but her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "For everything." Hope's passing was felt deeply, not just by Clara, but by the entire community. The shelter held a memorial, people sharing stories of how Hope had touched their lives. But his legacy didn't end there. Clara continued her work, inspired by the love and loyalty that Hope had embodied. The shelter thrived, saving countless lives and bringing joy to families far and wide. And in a quiet corner of the cemetery, beside Daniel's grave, a small stone marker was placed. It read, "For Hope, a loyal friend and a beacon of love." Years later, Sarah published a book about the story that had started it all. It was titled The Graveyard Puppy, A Story of Hope. It became a bestseller, touching hearts around the world and inspiring others to see the beauty in the bonds we share with animals. And though Hope was gone, his spirit lived on in every wagging tail, every joyful bark, every life saved by the shelter he had inspired. Because love, true love, never really ends. It just finds new ways to grow. The book, The Graveyard Puppy, A Story of Hope, didn't just sell copies, it sparked a movement. People began sharing their own stories of how animals had changed their lives. Online forums buzzed with tales of rescue, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their pets. Clara's shelter became more than a local sanctuary. It became a symbol of resilience and love on a global scale. Donations flooded in from every corner of the world. Messages arrived, daily handwritten letters, emails, even video messages from people who felt inspired to adopt, volunteer, or simply spread kindness in their communities. Clara was overwhelmed but humbled. Every time she read a story, every time she saw another animal find a home, she thought of Hope. One day, Clara received an unexpected visitor. A young girl, no more than 10 years old, walked into the shelter holding a scruffy little dog with wide, frightened eyes. The girl's mother followed close behind, smiling nervously. "I saw Hope's story," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to help dogs like him." Clara knelt, her gaze meeting the girl's. "What's your name?" "Emily," the girl said, clutching the dog tighter. "And who's this?" Clara asked, gently stroking the dog's head. "This is Milo," Emily replied. "He's scared of people, but I think he's brave." like Hope was. Clara's heart swelled. She reached out, her hand resting on Emily's shoulder. "You're already doing something incredible, Emily. Milo's lucky to have you." The girl beamed, her shyness melting away. That moment planted a seed. Emily began volunteering at the shelter, helping with feedings, cleaning, and spending time with the animals. She quickly became a fixture there, her compassion and enthusiasm infectious. As Clara watched Emily grow, she saw something remarkable, proof that Hope's legacy wasn't just about the past. It was about the future, about the lives that would continue to be touched and transformed by his story. Years turned into decades, and the shelter became a foundation, with branches in cities across the country. Clara, now older, had stepped back from the day-to-day operations, but her heart remained with the animals and the people who cared for them. One afternoon, as she sat on her porch sipping tea, a familiar face appeared at the gate. It was Sarah, holding a copy of the latest edition of her book. "I thought you might want to see this," Sarah said, handing it to Clara. Clara flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling slightly. The book had been updated with new chapters, detailing the shelter's growth and the countless lives it had saved. At the very end was a photograph, a candid shot of Clara sitting on the shelter porch, Hope resting beside her. Beneath the photo was a simple caption, "Love never ends." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You've captured it beautifully," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Sarah smiled. "It's not just my work, it's yours. And Hope's." They sat together in silence for a while, the weight of all they had built settling around them like a warm embrace. As the years passed, Clara's health began to wane, but her spirit remained as strong as ever. She spent her final days surrounded by the people she loved and the animals she had dedicated her life to saving. When she passed, the community came together to honor her legacy. The shelter was renamed the Hope Clara Foundation, a tribute to the two souls who had started it all. And in the same quiet corner of the cemetery, where Daniel and Hope rested, Clara was laid to rest. A new marker joined theirs, simple and understated, but filled with meaning. Clara Hart, a life of love, guided by hope. The story didn't end there. Emily, the young girl who had once brought Milo to the shelter, grew up to become its director. She carried on Clara's vision, expanding the foundation's reach and ensuring its values remained intact. One day, as Emily walked through the shelter, now bustling with volunteers and happy animals, she paused by a wall lined with photographs. At the center was the iconic image of Hope by Daniel's grave, the photo that had started it all. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She turned to the group of children visiting the shelter for the first time. "Do you see this dog?" she asked, pointing to the photo. The children nodded, their eyes wide with curiosity. "This is Hope," Emily said. "He taught us something very important, that even in the darkest times, love can light the way." The children listened intently, their faces filled with wonder. And now Emily continued, her voice steady but soft, "It's our turn to keep that love alive." As the children scattered to play with the animals, Emily looked at the photo one last time. She didn't need to say anything. The legacy of Hope, Clara, and Daniel was alive and thriving, carried forward by every wagging tail, every happy bark, and every person who believed in the power of love. Because some stories don't have endings. They become part of us, woven into the fabric of who we are, reminding us that even the smallest acts of kindness can change the world. And so, Hope's story lived on. As years passed, the Hope Clara Foundation became a global movement, a beacon for anyone who had ever felt lost or broken. Shelters across the world bore its name, each one a sanctuary of love and compassion. The story of Hope, Clara, and Daniel became a part of textbooks, films, and speeches that inspired generations. Emily, now older and wise in her years, stood at the opening of a new foundation branch. A crowd had gathered, families with adopted pets, volunteers, and those who had been touched by the story that started it all. Emily took a deep breath and stepped to the podium. Behind her hung a banner with a familiar photograph, Hope sitting by Daniel's grave, his small body filled with quiet strength and loyalty. She began to speak, her voice steady but full of emotion. "Years ago, a little puppy refused to leave a grave," Emily said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "That act of loyalty and love changed everything. Hope didn't just save Clara, he saved me. He saved all of us." The crowd listened intently, some wiping away tears, others holding their pets close. What Clara taught me, and what Hope showed the world, is something we must never forget. Love is not just a feeling, it's an action. It's choosing to care, even when it's hard. It's showing up, even when the world feels heavy. And it's never, ever giving up. Emily paused, her voice trembling slightly. Hope's legacy is not just in the shelters we've built or the animals we've saved. It's in every person who chooses kindness, every family who opens their home to a rescue, and every heart that dares to believe in second chances. She stepped back from the podium, and the crowd erupted into applause. Behind her, the doors to the new shelter opened, welcoming a flood of people ready to adopt, volunteer, or simply feel the warmth of a place built on love. As the sun set that evening, Emily walked through the shelter, her footsteps quiet on the tiled floors. She stopped in front of a wall dedicated to the shelter's history. At the center was the same image of Hope, by the grave, surrounded by photos of Clara, Daniel, and the countless animals whose lives had been transformed. Emily placed her hand gently on the photo of Hope. "We're still carrying your light," she whispered. As if on cue, a small puppy padded up to her, its tail wagging enthusiastically. Emily knelt, scooping the puppy into her arms. Its eyes held the same spark of life and hope that she had seen in Hope so many years ago. "Welcome home," she said softly, cradling the puppy against her chest. The story of Hope, Clara, and Daniel didn't end with a single shelter, a single town, or even a single lifetime. It became a ripple that spread across the world, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. And though time marched on, and generations came and went, their legacy remained etched into the hearts of all who heard their story, a testament to the power of love, loyalty, and hope. Because in the end, it wasn't just about a graveyard puppy or a grieving woman. It was about all of us. About the moments when we feel lost, the people or animals who find us, and the simple truth that even in the darkest times, love is always waiting to lead us home. And so, their story became ours, a never-ending tale of hope.